So Joe Biden wins the presidency, and the day after it's announced, the Dow falls to 5,000. Is that a viable scenario? Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. I wanted to talk to you about what I believe is the great crash coming. I've referenced this before on this program, but I think it deserves a little deeper drill down because I think this is a big deal. Congressman Ken Buck, for example, he's a Republican. He came out and he said the actual national debt of the United States is $30 trillion. And everybody's going, oh, I thought it was $20 trillion, $22 trillion, whatever it is. We're adding $2.7 trillion so far this year. Just in June, it was $864 billion was the deficit. That's what a normal year is. Keep in mind, when Reagan came into office and started this whole two Santa Claus starve the beast thing, the national debt was less than $1 trillion. By the time Reagan left office, it was almost $2.5 trillion. Now we're looking at $30 trillion, but what he's including in this, the number that he's including in this, is the $7 trillion that the Fed has created out of thin air to buy corporate bonds and corporate stocks to prop up the stock market. So if the Fed hadn't done that, then the stock market today, right now, would probably be in the neighborhood of where it was, in the weeks or months after the recovery began from the George W. Bush crash of 2008, the last Republican crash. Maybe 12,000, 15,000. It got all the way down to around 6,000. But, it'd probably be in the neighborhood of 12,000. And the only reason that it is where it has been for the last year or so, more or less, in the mid-20s, the only reason it's there is because the Fed is buying stocks. And the only reason that anybody else is buying the stocks, and a lot of these corporations, like the airlines, for example, where, not only are they losing money hand over fist, but they're probably going to continue to do so for years to come. The only reason anybody's buying those stocks is, and in fact, for that matter, the only reason these companies can continue to operate is because they've been able to borrow money. They've been able to issue bonds, which is, debt instruments. Corporations issue a bond. United Airlines needs $1 billion. So they write $1 billion worth of IOUs. These IOUs are called bonds. But somebody has to buy those IOUs. And if nobody will buy them and thus loan that money to United Airlines stops operating. So the Fed is buying them right now. Now, the Fed is being run by a guy by the name of Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is the first Fed chairman. He was put into place by Donald Trump. He's the first Fed chairman since, I think, the end of the Carter administration, basically in 40 years. I think we had one guy for 2 years who was, in fact, he was a Republican during a Democratic administration. And I want to say Bill Cohen, but I think he was the defense secretary. But in any case, we had one guy who was not an economist. But Jerome Powell is not an economist. So what's Jerome Powell's background? Well, he's worth tens of millions of dollars, $50 to $70 million. Or very wealthy, actually. We don't know exactly because, it's always, all these disclosure forms are in ranges, but he's very wealthy. How did he get rich? He was an investment banker. He's not an economist. His bachelor's degree is in political science. And then he got a law degree. He's a bankster. He was one of the managing directors. He was on the board of the Carlyle Group. Remember the Carlyle Group that George Herbert Walker Bush took a job as CEO of after he left the White House so that the defense industry could pay him back? Well, Jerome Powell was, that's how he got rich, is in the Carlyle Group. So he's a banker, not an economist. So you've got a banker running the Fed. The federal legislation from 1913 that created the Fed, nowhere in there does it say that the Fed may buy stocks or corporate bonds. It authorizes the Fed to buy Federal treasuries, this is how the Fed regulates interest rates, is by buying and selling federal treasuries, changing the demand for treasuries, which changes the interest rate that has to be paid in order to get people to buy treasuries. But buying corporate bonds, no. But nonetheless, for the first time in the 107-year history of the Federal Reserve Bank, the Fed has been buying, they created $7 trillion out of thin air, which the Fed can do, right? If you look at the paper money in your pocket, it doesn't say, Treasury note. It doesn't, as it used to before 1913. It doesn't say U.S. money. It says Federal Reserve note. The Fed can create as much money as it wants. They've created $7 trillion and bought corporate bonds and corporate stocks with that. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it. So what happens on, say, November 10th or November 20th, when all the votes finally get counted, all the mail-in ballots and everything, and it is declared that Donald Trump won the election? What does Jerome Powell do? My theory is that at that point, Jerome Powell says, well, okay, the next guy in is probably going to replace me, although I'm not sure that they can do that. Well, that's a whole nother discussion. But Trump did with Janet Yellen. But in any case, he's probably going to say, or we know that he dances to the tune of Donald Trump. And what's Donald Trump's favorite game? Revenge. And who does Donald Trump hate? The majority of Americans who didn't vote for him. The millions of Americans who showed up in the streets the day after his inauguration, the women in particular, African Americans, and their allies who were out in the streets after George Floyd was murdered by 4 cops in Minneapolis. Who does Donald Trump hate? The majority of America. So what does he do? Well, after Joe Biden is declared president, declared the winner, Trump tells Powell, stop buying bonds and stocks. In fact, start selling your bonds and stocks. And what happens over the course of the next week? The Fed does that, and the stock market goes down to 6,000, which is where it was after the crash in 2008, after Bush's crash. In fact, it might even go lower than that because things are far worse than they were. This isn't just a problem of bad loans for home mortgages. This is systemic. This is the entire economy. Let's say the Dow goes to 5,000 or 4,000. I mean, a real 1929 style collapse, which, by the way, took 6 months to happen. And this will be, 6 months on from it getting really bad? And then all the media and all the press and Trump and everybody, they go out in front of the cameras and they say, well, the market has its own intelligence. And, Democrats were elected to take over the White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives, and therefore the market knows that they're going to raise taxes and destroy the economy. So how do we deal with this? I think the way that we deal with this is by inoculating America to it, by telling everybody you know right now that Donald Trump is going to crash the economy if a Democrat is elected.